Our Dharma talk tonight, which is Tuesday, the 24th of April, is going to be on time, or in perspective, on time. I thought I'd entitle it, May You Live in Interesting Times, which is said to be an ancient Chinese curse. But it also, it's a bit ambiguous, it could also be a blessing. So, curse or blessing, we are definitely living in interesting times. Okay, we'll start with a question. Where does this come from? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. Yes, Tale of Two Cities. It's the famous opening from Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, published in 1859, but describing the French Revolution in the century previous. But Dickens was also referring to his own time, the Industrial Revolution, the Victorian period. And this passage is just as relevant to our own times. It is the best of times. We literally have all the knowledge of the world at our fingertips. We're more interconnected with each other than we have ever been in history. And yet, the worst of times, we're entering the sixth period of mass extinction, the first caused by humans. And really the fate of our planet is hanging in the balance. So it's the best of times and the worst of times. During World War II, when the German forces occupied France and the collaborating governments relocated to the town of Vichy, Parisians thought of themselves as living under German time, a time imposed on them by the Nazi regime. It was a time they had to live through, and also a time that gave rise to the French resistance. And this is one aspect of time. We can never step out of our own time, our own historical situation. There's no detached perspective from which we can see how all the pieces fit together. Time just has to be lived through. At the moment, the United States is experiencing the nightmare of the Trump administration. And we don't know how things will turn out. The situation keeps changing day after day, tweet after tweet. But we can be assured that sooner or later, Trump will be gone. He'll be gone. And all of his vileness and the Republican Party's erosion of democracy will be written down in detail and published. This is another aspect of time, that nothing is fixed, nothing's there forever. Everything's always flowing, always passing. It's good to bear that in mind. Little story that we sometimes use as an encouragement talk in Sesshin. A king once asked a wise man to inscribe 4 words of wisdom on the inner circle of a golden ring, words that would give him solace in times of hardship and would act as a caution in times of happiness. The wise man came back with the 4 words engraved on the ring, and they were, "This too will pass." This too will pass. Always good to remember, if we find ourselves under a cloud of depression, in a depressed state, or if we feel helpless or useless or stuck in a rut, it's helpful to remind ourselves that such states of mind are only temporary. They arise, they stay with us, and then they depart. They pass. We're all works in progress. And through our Zazen we realize how our moods and emotions come and go, how the weather patterns of our mind are always changing. And through Zazen we realize what a stabilizing and centering practice we have. Now there are two, really broadly speaking, there are two basic conceptions of time. Time as an arrow and time as a circle. Time as an arrow, or linear time, is the fundamental tenet of Jewish, Christian and Islamic faith. Time begins with the creation of the world by God, and it ends with the day of judgment, or the apocalypse. In contrast, Hinduism and Buddhism conceive of time as a circle or a wheel, cyclic time, with the earth and the universe going through a series of ever reoccurring cycles. And there's said to be 4 phases to each cycle: creation, continuation, demise, and then complete destruction. And on a human level, until complete enlightenment, we're all on the wheel of birth and death, dying and being reborn again and again into samsara, into this world of desire and suffering. The Sanskrit word for one complete cycle, this cosmic cycle of creation, continuation, demise, and then destruction, the word used is kalpa, which is an incredibly long period of time. One definition of a kalpa, and this is just a small kalpa, there are small and big kalpas, this is a small kalpa, is the period of time required for a goddess to wear away a stone 10 cubic miles if she descended from heaven and brushed it with her garments once every 3 years. So that's a kalpa, it's infinite time. Then the other end of the spectrum is the Sanskrit word for an incredibly brief period of time, and that's known as kasana. And it's sort of the equivalent of our modern nanosecond. And it's said that a kasana is approximately 1/75th of a second. And in each kasana there are said to be 900 mental arisings and ceasings. In Japan, kasana became known as nen, and nen can be translated as thought moment. And it's found in the original Japanese version of our kanzeon chant. In Japanese, part of it is Chonnen kanzeon, bonnen kanzeon, nenjen juri shinki, nennen furi shin, which translated as through the day kanzeon, through the night kanzeon, this moment arises from mind, this moment itself is mind. In fact, it really should be this thought moment arises from mind, this thought moment itself is mind. That's a little bit of a mouthful, doesn't sort of scan. But it really is thought moment. And Master Lin Shi said, learning to cut off successive nen is better than 10 years travelling around on pilgrimage. In practical terms, this means that when we catch ourselves thinking, we cut off successive thoughts by simply returning to our practice, if it's a breath practice or just sitting or a koan. And in doing so, catching ourselves caught up in thought, returning to the practice, we stop ourselves from being carried away by a train of thoughts or a string of thought moments, one linked to another, Dog barking. Oh, what kind of dog is that? Maybe an Alsatian or a Corgi. I remember the Corgi my mother had. That was back in 1984. He used to go on, and then, you're off somewhere. So as soon as you're realizing that you're thinking about a dog, back to the practice. Returning to the wide view of time, Islam Nasir, who was, I think, in about the 12th century, combined Greek and Ismaili philosophy. Ismaili is one of the streams of Shiite Islam, one of the non-orthodox streams, non-fundamental streams, like the Sufis. And Islam Nasir compared the notion of eternity and time and set forth this proposition. Time is eternity measured by the movements of the heavens, whose name is day, night, month, and year. Eternity is time not measured, having neither beginning nor end. So time is eternity measured by the movements of the heavens, and eternity is time not measured, having neither beginning nor end. And Mircea Eliade, a great writer on world religion, points out that certain mystics and philosophers, like Nasir, conceive of eternity as a moment without duration. So a nice summing up, eternity as a moment without duration. And Vasubandhu, one of our Buddhist ancestors, for his part states, the array of instants is uninterrupted. Take a little time to savor that, because it's important. Great teaching. The array of instants is uninterrupted. That's the teaching of Zen. All we have is this present moment. That's all there is. Past and future don't exist. The past moment has passed, and the future moment's yet to come. There's just this. Just this. Just this. Moment by moment. That's how our practice is. Moment by moment. One writer, Catherine Conley, uses the term Baroque time for a moment endlessly folded within itself. So Baroque time being a moment endlessly enfolded within itself, a time that expands in the present, revealing a great depth which we can get lost in, sometimes for years, even though in the normal world only a few minutes have passed. And this, of course, is a theme that occurs in many folk stories from around the world. And one story is related by a modern Indian teacher, Sri Ramakrishna. So I'd just like to read the story. It's from a book, Papers from the Erroneous Yearbooks. Title is Man and Time, which is a little bit outdated now, Man and Time, but anyway, that's the title of the book. And the story goes like this. One of the protagonists is the Indian god Vishnu. A famous ascetic named Narada has gained the favor of Vishnu by his innumerable austerities. The god appears to him and promises to grant a wish. "Show me the magical power of thy being," Narada asks of him. Vishnu consents and beckons the ascetic to follow him. A little later, they find themselves on a deserted path in the blazing sun. Vishnu is thirsty and asks Narada to go on for another few hundred yards, where a village may be seen, and to bring him back some water. Narada hastens to the village and knocks at the door of the first house. A beautiful girl opens the door. The ascetic gazes upon her at length and forgets why he has come. He enters the house, and the girl's parents receive him with respect due to a saint. Time passes. At length Narada marries the girl and learns to know the joys of marriage and the hardships of a peasant's life. 12 years pass. Now Narada has 3 children, and at the death of his father-in-law he has inherited the farm. But in the course of the 12th year, the region is flooded by torrential rains. In one night, the herds are drowned, and the house collapses. Supporting his wife with one hand, holding his 2 children with the other, and carrying the smallest child on his shoulder, he struggles through the water. But the burden is too much for him. The smallest child slips into the water. Narada leaves the other 2 and tries to recover him. But it is too late. The torrent has swept him away. While he is looking for the little one, the torrent swallows up the 2 other children, and not long after, his wife. Narada himself falls, and the torrent carries him along, unconscious and inert as a piece of wood. When he awakens, he has been cast up on a rock. Remembering his sorrows, he bursts out sobbing. But suddenly he hears the familiar voice. "My child, where is the water you were to bring? I have been waiting for more than half an hour." Narada turns his head and looks. In place of the torrent, it has destroyed everything. He sees the deserted, sun-baked fields. "And now, do you understand the secret of my being?" Vishnu asks him. In our practice, we can understand how subjective our experience of time is. Especially doing sesshin, doing a 7-day retreat, when we become deeply absorbed in the practice, a round of zazen can pass in a flash. On the other hand, when we're in pain, especially doing sesshin in one of the afternoon rounds, a round of zazen can seem incredibly long. We used to grit our teeth, and minute after minute we just wait for the timer to hit the bell and end the round. In Rochester, I was a timer for many sessions, and in sessions, especially when there are 50-odd people, this sort of group mind develops, and at some time, as timer, you can just sense, as you're sitting there, the group mind saying to you, sending you messages like, "Just pick up the bell and hit it, pick up the bell and hit it, in the round." But you wait until the 35-minute round is over. One koan, in our koan curriculum that deals directly with time is case number 3 in the Blue Cliff record, Matsu's Sun-Faced Buddha, Moon-Faced Buddha. It goes like this. It's a short koan. The great master Matsu was seriously ill. The head monk asked him, "How are you feeling these days?" Matsu said, "Oh, sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha." In Mahayana Buddhism, there are innumerable Buddhas in the past and in concurrent Buddha realms. In the Sutra of the Names of the Buddha, it is said that the sun-faced Buddha lived for 1,800 years, while the moon-faced Buddha lived for just one night and a day. So when you work on the koan, what does Matsu mean when he says sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha? As the koan says, Matsu's seriously ill. In fact, he was on his deathbed, and the head monk, always on the lookout for an opportunity to get to receive the teaching, knows that his teacher is dying, and so quite pointedly asks his teacher, "Ooh, how are you feeling these days?" And that's Matsu's reply, "Sun-faced Buddha, moon-faced Buddha. Both Buddha, both Buddha." Each being lives its own time completely. A fruit fly, I think, lives around about 40 to 50 days, and a giant tortoise can live over 100 years. And I was really amazed to learn recently that an octopus, and an octopus is such an intelligent, highly evolved creature, that octopuses only live for 2 years. Only 2 years. That is 2 human years. That's important. Because an octopus or a fruit fly may have a completely different experience of time to us. And this again points to the subjective nature of time. Each living thing possesses a different sense of time. The time of a quick-growing bamboo differs to the time of a slow-growing pine tree. The haiku by Den Sitejo. Pine mushrooms live 1,000 years in one autumn. Pine mushrooms live 1,000 years in one autumn. Den Sitejo was a Japanese nun, a student of Zen master Bankei. And this brings us to Master Dogen's famous classical in the Shobogenzo, Uji, or being time. And this is Dogen's great contribution to the question of time. And no Zen talk on time would fail to read some passages of Uji. The basic message of Dogen in this part of the Shobogenzo in Uji is that we don't just experience time, or are at the mercy of time, or are carried along by the flow of time, but we are time. Each of us is time. So what I'll do is I'll read a few passages from Being Time. I won't comment. I won't really write a commentary. It's just good just to absorb Dogen's words. First one. An old Buddha said, "For the time being, I stand astride the highest mountain peak. For the time being, I move on the deepest depths of the ocean floor. For the time being, I'm 3 heads and 8 arms. For the time being, I'm a staff or a wisp. For the time being, I'm a pillar or a lantern. For the time being, I'm the great earth and the heaven above." The time being means time. The time being means time, just as it is being, and being is all time. The 16-foot golden Buddha body is time. Because it is time, it is time's glorious radiance. You must learn to see this glorious radiance in the 24 hours of the day. The Ashura, with 3 heads and 8 arms, is time. Because it is time, it can be in no way different from the 24 hours of the day. Asuras were the angry gods in the Buddhist Parthenon, and they're also often portrayed as statues outside of temples, as wrathful deities who protect the temple. Dogen continues. Although you never measure the length or brevity of the 24 hours, their swiftness or slowness, you can still call them the 24 hours. Because the evidence of their coming and going is obvious, you do not come to doubt them. But even though you do not have doubts about them, that is not to say you know them. Since sentient beings doubt what they do not understand, their doubts are naturally vague and indefinite. Because of this, their past doubts do not necessarily coincide with their present ones. Nonetheless, the doubts themselves are, after all, none other than time. That's typical Dogen. But the important thing is the doubts themselves are, after all, none other than time. Our minds are none other than time. He uses the 24 hours, and of course we divide time arbitrarily into hours, minutes, seconds, and this is important for our functioning in the world. We're on time because we have this sense of time, of the hours and minutes and the days and the weeks, so that they're an important part of our everyday life. So we acknowledge the 24 hours or the 12 hours. A student once asked Master Joshu, how should I use the 24 hours? Joshu replied, you are used by the 24 hours. I use the 24 hours. So a sense of time is important, and how we use our time is important. What we use our time for. Annie Dillard said, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. Back to Dogen. The way the self arrays itself is the form of the whole world. We must see that everything, every being in this entire world, is a moment of time. Just read that again. We must see that everything, every being in this entire world, is a moment of time. No object obstructs another, just as no time obstructs another. The way-seeking mind arises in this world. A way-seeking moment arises in this mind. It is the same with practice and enlightenment. Thus, the self sending itself out in array sees itself. This is the realization that the self is time. We must study and learn how the myriad phenomena and numberless grasses exist over the entire earth, and how each grass in each form is the entire earth. The study of this is the beginning of Buddhist practice. When you have arrived within this field of suchness, it is a single blade of grass, a single form. The forms are understood and not understood. The grasses are grasped and not grasped. Since there is nothing but this moment, the time being is all the time there is. A grass being and a form being are both time. Just reflect right now. Is there an entire being or an entire world missing from your present time or not? A pine tree is time. A bamboo is time. You should come to understand that time is not only flying past. You should learn that flying past is not the only virtue inherent in time. If time were to give itself to merely flying past, it would have to leave gaps. You fail to experience the passage of being time and hear the utterance of its truth, because you learn only that time is something that goes past. The essential point is, all things in the entire world are linked with one another as moments. Inasmuch as all moments are being time, they are my being time. In another fascicle of the Shobogenzo, Wusho, Buddha Nature, Dogen sums up his teaching on time. If you wish to know the Buddha nature, you must realize that it is nothing other than temporal conditions themselves. In other words, our true nature is time. I'd like to look briefly, following on from Dogen, at some of the writings of the most famous Zen poet of the 20th century, Takahashi Shinkichi. He trained with a Rinzai Zen master, Ashikaga Shinzan. And his poetry is very, very admired, both in Japan and the West. One day, he began reading the Lotus Sutra. He had read it many times before without understanding its meaning. This time, however, he was deeply moved. He felt he understood something of the sutra's profound meaning, and so he wrote the poem Not Home, which consisted of just 3 lines. Tell them I am not home. Tell them nobody is here. I'll be back in 500 million years. Tell them I am not home. Tell them nobody is here. I'll be back in 500 million years. A very fine translator and commentator on haiku in Japanese writing, Makoto Ueda, writes, "The people in his hometown even erected a stone monument with the poem carved on it." What he found in the depths of the Lotus Sutra, he did not spell out in this short poem. One can surmise, however, that it was similar to a childhood experience he described in an essay called Nothingness. And this is Takahashi Shinkichi's memory. One day, when he was a young boy, he was walking along a path that paralleled a stream, when suddenly a thought flashed into his mind. I am currently strolling alongside a brook lined by linden trees, imagining a long string stretching from my present location to a spot in the past, several 100 million years ago. So the string attached to a spot in the past, several million years ago. Then I imagine another string that similarly extends into an infinitely remote future. The 2 strings should be the same length. Okay, these 2 strings should be the same length. One going to the past, one going to the future. I am always at the midpoint between past and future. If I walk a little over 30 minutes along the embankment, I shall leave the countryside and arrive in a city. But if I try the same experiment again in that city, the length of the 2 strings will remain the same. This is because both the past and the future have the same infinite length. The situation will be unchanged in 50 or 60 years, although I shall be an old man by then. I am then always at the same spot. Minute by minute, the time I experience vanishes and is reduced to nothing. Both the time that is past and the time to come crumble minute by minute, and there always exists nothing but my own self located at the midpoint. So it's a wonderful story and a wonderful image of these two ropes, and always at the midpoint is Takahashi. What we can say is that each person, each of us, is the center of the universe, midpoint between past and future. We are a manifestation of time, and we recognize that others equally are manifestations of time. This is something to celebrate. An early translator of haiku, R.H. Blythe, wrote that haiku, traditional three-line Japanese verse, haiku record what Wordsworth calls those spots of time, those moments which for some quite mysterious reason have a peculiar significance. In these spots of time, we can say these spots of time, Wordsworth's spots of time, the vividness of each moment